Hi, hey, thank you for joining us today. I've got some great information about the Tactical Octopus Gang. What a name, isn't it? And I have it in this week's newsletter, but we're going to delve into it a little bit more right now. Well, with a name like Tactical Octopus, you'd think these guys were into all kinds of things. And guess what? You'd be right. There is another set of attacks going on. We saw them very active in April of 2023, and they were pretending that they were the IRS and was sending information around for people and trying to get you to click on stuff that you should never click on, right? But they're doing it again. Just this week, in fact, it was just a day or two ago, I was talking with one of my clients, and they got a phone call from somebody. And the phone call was supposedly from the sheriff's office. Now, this guy is up on some minor charges, and so he's kind of expecting a phone call, and they're going to set up the court date and everything else, right? So he was saying, yeah, I got a call from the sheriff, and the sheriff said that I had not made it to court on time and missed my court date, and therefore I was going to be fined or I needed to go and turn myself in. Now, what was interesting is he said, okay, well, I can go to the bank and get the cash and we can make this happen. Sorry for missing the court date. I didn't get a notification. And, so of course, the sheriff's office is there saying, yeah, right. That's what everybody says. And then when he said, I'll get you the cash, I'll run over to the bank right now, make sure I get it, and then I'll run it down to the sheriff's office. They said, no, the best way to do this is, are you guys ready? We should probably insert a drum roll here. But the best way to do this is buy gift cards and send us a picture of the front and the back of the gift card. But the back, before you take the picture of the back, make sure you scrape off, that gray stuff so we can see the number. And that's the best way to pay a fine to the sheriff's office. Can you believe that? So obviously he figured out almost immediately here, once they said that, this wasn't legitimate. But they're pulling at our heartstrings in some of these romance scams, some of the fake kidnapping scams that have been going on. And they just love this stuff. And in fact, over 90% of cyber attacks right now start with phishing emails. And because of the large language models that are out there and the ability to build one yourself, I have done this. I have a few of them that I've built and am running just kind of to mess around, take a look at all of the things I've written and hopefully be able to help write other stuff and help me find things and stuff. And frankly, I've been disappointed with it. Hasn't been that great. But, it is what it is, and it's good enough for the bad guys to be able to make you think that you are emailing or getting an email from somebody that you know. Remember, there's a website called Have I Been Pwned? Have I Been Pwned? PWNED.com. And this is run by a guy that I know, Troy Hunt, down in Australia. And it has in it a database of all kinds of bad actor stuff that people have done over the years. All kinds of it. And because he has this database, you can go for free to Have I Been Pwned and find out if your information has been found on the dark web. So you put in your email address and it'll tell you, okay, your email address was found here, here, and here. And along with email addresses, with this data that was stolen by the bad guys, they collected social security numbers, home addresses, the job titles, just all kinds of stuff that these guys have found. So you need to do that if you haven't already. And even if you have, you got to do this every once in a while. HaveIBeenPwned.com. You can also use it to check your password. So if you've got a password and you think it might be a good password, I've been using it forever, and no one could ever guess my password, type it in. It has a password function, and I trust Troy that he's not collecting passwords to do bad things with. And in fact, you don't have to give your email address to check a password. So there's frankly no way he could really trace you down even if he wanted to. But it will tell you if that password has been used online and found on the dark web. So if you go to haveibeenpwned.com at the top, you'll see passwords as one of the little tabs. So you hit password, and then we're going to try an incredibly great password that was used by one of the top Democrats a few years back. And he said his account was hacked. The Russians got in, which may be true. But his password was PASSW0RD. Oh, I was wrong. It was better than that. It was @SSW0RD. So let me see. What does Have I Been Pwned said? Oh, okay. It's a great password. It's only been seen 75,000 places on the dark web. Isn't that amazing? So it's saying this password has previously appeared in a data breach and should never be used. Well, in fact, it's appeared in 75,000 data breaches. So it's good to use something like this. If you're using the software that I've advised people to use, is called 1Password, you can quite easily have 1Password generate a good password for you, and it double checks automatically with Have I Been Pwned to see if that password was indeed used elsewhere and then stolen. Now, when we're talking about passwords, I want to point out a guidance that was released in 2017 by NIST. This is the National Institute of Standards and Technology. Now, for those of you who follow cryptography pretty closely, you might remember that NIST was the ones that polluted our random number generator algorithms and made it easier to crack passwords, right? But nowadays, they're good. They're really good guys. You can trust them, just like every other branch of the government out there. But I agree with this. They're saying that you should check your password against these existing databases, including haveibeenpwned.com. That's me adding that in there, okay? And there are a lot of freely downloadable pwned passwords, over 306 million of them. Isn't that something? They had other versions of this over the years, but really what you want to do is make sure your password is fairly long and easy for you to remember, but very hard to guess. So that means it's usually multiple words strung together using maybe a dash or a number sign, or it might be a comma, right? It could be a number, it could be all kinds of things. So just think of a bunch of words that you can put together and remember. Now, this is just between you and me, but if you come up with a good password, you might have to write it down. Put it on that little Post-it note, but don't stick the Post-it note on your computer terminal. And then you can refer to it for a few times while you are learning the password, or maybe you put it into your smartphone. And then once you've got that password memorized, go ahead and delete it from your phone, or mess up, crunch up, and throw away that little Post-it note you've been keeping in your pocket or in your wallet or your purse, wherever it is you might have that silly thing. Because now you'll have a good password. And you no longer are recommended to change it all the time. Now you can go for a very long time without having to change it. 6 months, a year is probably acceptable. It kind of depends. But have a look, double check it, and I think it's as important as you can get. There's no question about it. So I went through all of that because of our friends Tactical Octopus. What they are doing right now is going after you and me, and they're playing some tricks pretending they are the tax man. And the tax man, of course, is always coming for you. But there are a few things that they're doing. So I've got a quick write-up on it that's in this week's newsletter. and it's telling you about the software that they're trying to get you to download, what the name is. They're really big into ransomware attacks because they can make a lot of money on it pretty quickly, and it's a scary thing, right? It's like somebody breaking into your home after you've locked all your doors, right? And they are in your home. You're not there, right? You had left and locked all the doors, and then they get in, and then they seal up the house. They lock all of the doors, don't let you back in, and say, well, if you want access to your house again, you got to pay us. So we're talking about some serious damage here. We had a major shipping company that got hit by these guys, and they could not access any of their computer systems for days. Now, I want you to picture that, right? Not being able to get to your systems, not being able to deliver shoes to people. It's a real big problem, no question. So be careful out there. It's the normal stuff, and I've got this in a newsletter again, which is free and available at craigpeterson.com. But regularly update your software, back things up, and really be very suspicious of unsolicited emails. And we had another client just this past 2 weeks ago who said, hey, I got this. It's a new accountant at a client of ours. I got this email, and the company says that we got to pay this heating bill, or they're going to stop deliveries. And it was totally fake. So I'm glad she reached out to us, and we were able to resolve it. Hey, online, craigpeterson.com, and sign up for the free newsletter. Well, I've got 3 green energy stories for you today. I think you're going to like these. The first one is some scientists here, MIT and Princeton, talking about a hoax that's been going on. Now, what kind of hoax could there possibly be when we're talking about green and, climate change, or is it global warming, or is it global cooling? I can't remember. What year is it? Because it certainly does change around. But we've now got 2 prominent climate scientists who have taken on the EPA and their new rules to cut carbon dioxide emissions in electrical generation. Think about that for a couple of minutes, right? What the harm of cutting back electrical generation? Really, what's the harm? What's the harm of moving everything to solar or wind? Well, obviously, solar and wind are not reliable sources of electricity. And we as a society need reliable sources of electricity, very reliable. Our manufacturing, okay, I get it. We don't do manufacturing here anymore. We'd rather ship it overseas to China. What could possibly go wrong with something like that? So, we don't do manufacturing, so we don't need reliable electricity. We don't need reliable electricity for our homes or our hospitals. We don't need reliable electricity to charge our electric vehicles. We just don't need it. It's crazy to even think about, right? Right. Yeah. Well, these 2 scientists are arguing in testimony that these EPA regulations will be disastrous for the country for no scientifically justifiable reason. And when you read through this article that's in this week's newsletter, I think you will agree. They've got graphs in here. They've got all kinds of really great information. And it's looking at things from observations like balloon data sets. Some of them are satellite data sets. Some of them are reanalyses. Now, we've talked before. In fact, I had on a gentleman who had studied this. All of these heat stations where they've been monitoring the temperature. And they monitor the temperature by putting one of these stations, you might have seen them, I know I've seen them before, that is about, about 4 feet off of the ground, there's 4 legs, it's painted white, it has a little cute pyramid roof on the top of it, and it has louvers around the sides, right? And it's in the middle of a field. Well, the latest statistics by somebody who went and visited these sites showed that 98% of them are no longer in the field. Some of them had air conditioning blowing on them. You know, have you been out in front of your air conditioner, or even worse, the air conditioner for a building, some sort of a business building or warehouse? Have you felt the heat that comes off of that? Well, some of these temperature sensors that they're using to prove that we have global warming are actually sitting underneath the exhaust of air conditioners. Not just one, multiples. Some of these are now sitting in parking lots. So do you think there might be a difference in temperature sitting in a black asphalt parking lot versus sitting out in an open green field? Of course there's a huge difference there. And we know we've got heat islands when you talk about the cities. The cities get hot because they have so much of that infrastructure that just heats up, doesn't reflect the light, doesn't absorb the energy from the sun in order to use it for photosynthesis so that you can have the green plants, right? The cities are massive heat islands, and yet that's where many of these temperature sensors are. And so this is great, okay? So again, this is from Zero Hedge. Citing extensive data to support their case, William Happer, Professor Emeritus in Physics at Princeton University, and Richard Lisden, Professor Emeritus of Atmospheric Science at Massachusetts Institute of Technology, aka MIT, argue that the claims used by the EPA to justify the new regulations are not based on scientific facts, but rather political opinions and speculative models that have consistently been proven to be wrong. Quote, the unscientific method of analysis relying on consensus, peer review, government opinion, models that do not work, cherry-picking data, and omitting voluminous, contradictory data is commonly employed in these studies and by the EPA in the proposed rule. You've got to get the newsletter. And if you can't get the newsletter, and you can subscribe to that at craigpeterson.com/subscribe. But if you cannot get the newsletter, then go to my website and you will be able to see the articles. It is just so important. So Happer and Lisden stated, none of the studies provide scientific knowledge, and thus none provides any scientific support for the proposed rule. Now, we know the EPA has started losing some court cases because they were never given the authority that they're exercising over you, me, and businesses. It's not in the Constitution. We didn't agree to it. And in fact, even our elected representatives in Congress never agreed to it. It's amazing. So back to their quotes, all of the models that predict catastrophic global warming fail the key test of the scientific method. They grossly overpredict the warming versus actual data. The scientific method proves there is no risk that fossil fuels and carbon dioxide will cause catastrophic warming and extreme weather. Isn't that something? Now, climate models are notoriously terrible. Look at the model that was used for COVID-19 as an example. I know it's a completely different model. It's modeling a different type of science, which is about the spread of a virus, right? Versus is the Earth going to warm? But that model had predicted, what was it, like 2.5 million Americans to die from COVID-19. And of course, there were deaths, and it's just terrible to think about the number of deaths. You know, even one death is a terrible thing. But people die every year from the various flus, etc., etc. But there is a gentleman from England who had put together a model. Now, you and I must believe the model because he's got a PhD in putting together models. He doesn't have a PhD in programming, not that I don't think that would help very much, or a PhD in many other things like logic, etc., right? But he had a model that predicted 2.5 million Americans to die unless we did something amazingly drastic. And many people fell for that, right? Why wouldn't you? Here's someone that looks to be an expert. Here's government agencies using his data from his model and tried to save lives. Hey, that's what we're all trying to do, right? We didn't want to kill grandma. Or isn't that what they always told us? We just don't want to do it. Now they go on in the Epoch Times or Epic Times, depending on how you want to pronounce it. I know, again, I've had some of the reporters on my show before, and they pronounce it the Epoch Times, but a lot of people call it Epic. But here's a table that was presented to the EPA to illustrate the point. And I'm looking at it right now. It's a really nice graph, tons of data on it. And they say, and that was already an embarrassment in the 90s when I was director of energy research in the U.S. Department of Energy. I was funding a lot of this work, and I knew very well then that the models were over-predicting the warming by a huge amount. And that's how we know. We know it's correct. The warming's right? Because Al Gore predicted Florida would be underwater by 2020, and it is. You can't go to Florida anymore. It's completely submerged in the Atlantic Ocean, he said with tongue-in-cheek. Hey, online, CraigPeterson.com. You got to read this article. We were just talking about how our MIT scientists and Princeton scientists were both saying that this global warming thing is a hoax based on the CO2, right? It may warm, but much of it is a hoax and is disruptive to all of us. Well, there's more. Hey, you so have to read this article. You'll find it online on my website at CraigPeterson.com. Here's another one. The Biden administration announced that it's going to spend up to $1.2 billion to fund what is called direct air capture carbon removal projects. So in other words, it's sucking in air, and as the whole goal here is to either take that carbon dioxide that's in the air and bury it deep underground, which, by the way, makes petrochemicals. Or in some cases, they're actually taking that carbon dioxide and making a kind of a rock from it that should last forever. So we're binding that carbon dioxide up. And yet the studies show that the Earth has not been ever warmer since the 1930s. In fact, it's been cooling overall since the 1930s. And so many of these climate scientists, including the 80,000 that are agreeing that the global warming is man-caused, so many of them have been actually manipulating the temperature from the 1930s, lowering it, coming up with excuses to lower it, and then have been raising the actual temperature readings that we have from today. The accusations in this article by these scientists is just incredible. Now, one of the things that they pointed out was that when you have an increase in carbon in the atmosphere, things happen. Right? Now, Al Gore would have you believe, as would so many of these so-called climate scientists, that if you add an equal amount of carbon dioxide to the air that's already in it, you would be doubling the amount of carbon dioxide. Therefore, you'd be having dramatic increases in the heat, in the temperature. And yet the scientific scales of actual measured carbon dioxide in the air and the increase in temperature shows a barely nominal increase. It's kind of like a reverse dog's leg. The first 100 parts per million has quite an effect on the temperature. And then when you start getting up into the 400, 500 or more parts per million in the atmosphere, there's almost no effect on warming. However, dramatic effect on many other things, including since really the industrial age. They show a graph in there we have increased the amount of carbon dioxide in the air by about 150 parts per million, which is minuscule compared to some of the heights of carbon dioxide in millennia past. It's hardly worth accounting for, frankly. However, at the same time, the food production from the increased carbon dioxide in the air has increased some 20%. So when you start capturing the carbon from the air and you bind it up in a rock or in some other material, or you push it underground, what you're doing now is making it so it is harder to grow crops. Because remember, green things need carbon dioxide to grow, and they give off oxygen for us. We need the oxygen, and we give off carbon dioxide. So back to this Biden administration $1.2 billion boondoggle, they have projects in Louisiana and Texas, and they are going to be putting it underground. They're going to use it for cement, and cement does produce a lot of carbon dioxide. And this is according to a press release in the Department of Energy Secretary Jennifer Granholm. So she's really promoted this particular form of carbon capture and sequestration technology. But here's the dirty little secret. This technology, direct air capture, emits more carbon dioxide than it captures. And it relies on toxic materials, according to a January report from Food and Water Watch, which is this climate-focused nonprofit group that's advocating for green policies. Do you like that? So they're doing the exact opposite thing that they should be doing. This stack technology is more expensive per ton of removed carbon dioxide than other emissions mitigation techniques. It's very energy intensive. Where can they get that energy from? Oh, that's right, the windmills that aren't turning or are frozen up, or the solar panels that aren't producing because there's dirt and dust on them, or there's clouds in the sky. Clouds in the sky, yes. Can you imagine that? Yeah, if you have clouds in the sky, the electrical production goes down and sometimes completely gone away. So there's also a May 2022 report from World Resources Institute. They are trying to, quote, fundamentally transform the world's food, land, and water. That always concerns me, right? But they're saying, hey, it's even more expensive than other emissions mitigation techniques. I kind of wonder, I don't have the time or the research ability, but if one of you guys do, would you mind looking it up? I would love to see where this money is actually going and where it ends up. Is this money going to end up in the hands and pockets of politicians and their relatives? Oh, can you imagine if that would ever happen, right? Absolutely amazing. So the Department of Energy anticipates that the two new projects will remove at least 2 million tons of carbon dioxide from the air each year, and that's equivalent to the annual emissions generated by almost 500,000 gas-powered vehicles, according to them, right? Yeah. Oh, and by the way, those companies, for every let's see, what is it? Yeah, ton of carbon dioxide they capture, they get to make $85, and that's coming straight from you, the taxpayer. And $180 per ton of every ton of carbon dioxide that's stored permanently, according to the White House. So there you go. The Inflation Reduction Act, which had nothing to do with reducing inflation, and of course did not reduce inflation, but was actually a so-called green energy bill, is really messing things up again, isn't it? So what are you going to do about that? The other crazy thing that the Biden administration is doing when it comes to green is they want to reach net zero carbon emissions in the American power sector by 2035, which is absolutely ridiculous. And as the science is proving, unneeded, right? Except if you're trying to enrich yourself because you own money in either the carbon exchanges or maybe solar panel companies or windmill companies, right? And that money, where's that going? Well, that's going to China. It's not really going to U.S. companies. Yeah. Oh my gosh. So this article, Daily Caller, they reached out to the White House and the Department of Energy to comment on this, and shock of shocks, they didn't hear from anybody. Oh, one more real quick one here. China wants to put its world-famous exploding batteries in your homes, in helicopters, and much, much more. You've heard about these, right? These cars that are catching fire. The warnings that if you have an electric car, do not charge it in your home. Do not charge your electric car next to your home. Make sure if you have a charger installed, it's somewhere, hopefully in the middle of a desert where there's no woods or anything else to burn, because they can catch fire. Yeah. But here's what's happening. China's starting to make more of these batteries and sell them to us in the United States. So, hey, beware of the boom from Chinese batteries. Stick around, of course, a lot more coming right up. And I appreciate you visiting me online, CraigPeterson.com. Zoom, Teams, whether it's Microsoft or WebEx, those are pieces of software we've used a lot since we've been locked down. And the entire work environment has changed dramatically. So what does that actually mean right now? A lot of people have benefited pretty dramatically from being able to work at home. I know my sister, for instance, is now living close to her family in southern Utah, and her employer is, 1,000 miles away from where she's living, but she gets to be near her family, and she gets online, and they have meetings with people, and she does what she needs to do, right? With sending emails and writing reports and following up on stuff. And her employer seems to be quite happy with what she's doing. They know that she's down in 1,000 miles away in southern Utah. Now, there's a lot of people that have done some other things, maybe a little more underhanded. They've been flying around the world. I read an article of this one lady who every weekend she takes off after work at 4 or 5 p.m. on Friday, flies to Europe or wherever she wants to fly, spends the weekend there, and then she has to be in the office 2 days a week, so she does it Tuesday and Wednesday. So she flies back on Tuesday so that she's there Tuesday morning or Monday night. And then she goes into the office for a couple of days, works from home a couple of days, and then takes off on vacations again. So that's one way to do it. I also know a couple of people who will go nameless, but I know them quite well, who both, and their employers agreed to this. They both work from wherever. They were over in Holland, and they spent a week there, and were having a whole lot of fun going around Holland and working U.S. East Coast time. And of course, Holland and much of that Central Europe is about 6 hours ahead of U.S. East Coast. So they had an interesting day, right? Basically a late evening. All morning long, they could do what they wanted to. And they're spending time in Belgium. I think they're going to spend a couple of weeks there. And both of them are working full-time. Well, they've taken a couple of days off, but as a whole, they're working full-time. And that work full-time is being done online. So they have meetings using the technology that whatever their company wants them to use. Some companies obviously use Zoom. Some of them use different types of Teams. And for them, it's a great thing. It reminds me of Tim Ferriss's book that I got so excited about, The 4-Hour Work Week, which has never come true for me. Right? I'd be happy if I only had to work 4 hours a day. My typical day is somewhere between 12 and 14 hours, which is, I guess, too much work. But I really like helping people, so I do it no matter what, right? But he had this promise of, yeah, you can kind of work from anywhere. And it was the lockdown that gave us the ability to do that, because working from home is kind of a fun thing, and it worked out pretty well, and it lets you kind of go wherever you wanted to go. Well, many businesses have found that, okay, it hasn't worked out as well as they thought. There's a lot of interaction that does not occur when you're in a meeting. And I love this article that I came across. This was, Ars Technica. And Zoom's CEO, Zoom, the video conferencing company, Zoom's CEO has said he wants his employees to return to the office. If you live within 50 miles of the Zoom office that you're assigned to, he expects you in the office at least 2 days a week. Now, that's really kind of interesting. He was caught also on some leaked audio from an internal Zoom meeting that was shared with Business Insider that the CEO's name's Eric Wan called employees back to the office because he believes that, quote, remote work did not allow people to build as much trust or to be as innovative. I actually kind of agree with that, right? Now, that kind of seems to go against Zoom's brand, which promises immersive in-office collaboration right from home. And, there certainly is a lot of that you can do that way. But I found a really great article on Forbes magazine this week, too. And it's saying, do people still interact better when in person? And the answer to that is, yeah, they actually do. And it goes into a lot of science that has been really explored for, I don't know, I think about 80 years. I think it was the oldest article and book that they referred to. But things like touching builds trust. So even shaking a hand, nothing that's out of the ordinary or someone might consider to be an assault, just that sort of touch is enough to build trust and have a face-to-face little ritual going on there. According to research, shaking hands causes the centers of the brain associated with rewards to activate. You are literally conveying warmth when you touch someone. And I know I've caught myself before, reaching out to touch someone's shoulder or arm or even the elbow, right? When you're trying to comfort them or try and build a bond with them. It's just something you do subconsciously. Number 2, you pick up hidden messages. Well, that's kind of interesting. Here's a book from 1971 called Silent Messages, and it says that the total feeling is 7% verbal, 38% vocal, and 55% facial feeling. In other words, facial expressions play a very large part in delivering a message. Think of people that talk with their hands, but we all have these micro expressions, and I've seen some interesting studies on those things. But things like your pupils are dilating. That's not exactly micro, but some of these things, it can just be, if you're videotaping it, a frame where you catch someone's mouth or nose or something else, just this little expression that's actually giving away what they really think, what they really feel. But if you can look into someone's eyes, you can absorb emotional information and be able to respond to them. Complexity formulas with groups are often difficult because of it. There's so many non-verbal cues and signals that you don't pick up via a video conference. These days, most of these people that are working from home have multiple monitors, usually a larger monitor that's augmenting the laptop or your desktop screen, and it's really helpful for participating in a meeting. For instance, when I'm on a WebEx Teams meeting, I have 2 displays, and that allows me to kind of work on something that I'm going to show them and move it into the display for them to see. And I can see their face full screen, which gives me more visual clues again. People also tend to mirror emotions, mirror and reflecting. You might be familiar with that. and you tend to pay more attention. This is why the advice nowadays, if you're on a meeting, let's call it a Zoom meeting, a video conference call, that you should never turn off your camera. I was on a meeting just last night, or yeah, it was night for her, it was morning for me. And she said, well, I have my camera off because I'm not business dressed. But we missed all cues other than the verbal ones, right? And it makes it kind of difficult to build trust. In this case, it was an attorney, right, that I was trying to help out with a legal problem having to do with cybersecurity. So the advice nowadays is, hey, it doesn't matter if your hair's up in curlers. Do people still do that? Or if you're in your pajamas, throw a shirt on or whatever and turn on your camera. Because who knows what the person is doing with the camera off? Are they paying any attention at all? Are they sitting there with their phone scrolling through Facebook? Are they taking care of a kid or a dog? Which is all fine. But if they're doing something else, I would rather wait until I have their attention if I'm trying to deliver some important information. And I'm sure you're the same way, right? Don't you find that frustrating? Or is it just me, frankly? But face-to-face meetings really help convey that the topic, maybe the person, is important, and you need to pay attention. So that's why you should really have your camera turned on all of the time, no matter what, right? When you're meeting in person, there's no place to hide. People are sitting there. We all can see what's going on. We've all been in packed meeting rooms. The last few rows have people who are kind of checking their phones, right? For most of my business life, we didn't have these smartphones, right? They've only been around. Well, the iPhone, is not even 15 years right now. And it's all pretty new technology, but still people were hanging out in the back and just kind of dozing off almost with their eyes open. So you couple all of this with exhaustion and boredom, well, obviously the in-person meetings can be really good. Right size groups are important, and there's a rule, I don't know if you guys have heard of this, called the 2 pizza rule that Forbes is talking about in this article. And basically it says it's a right size group is 2 pizzas to discuss something important to them. And 2 pizzas means you're going to limit the number of people that are going to be in there. Because if everybody gets a slice, what is it? A pizza with, 6 slices, 8 slices? So maybe 16 people. And at least in video conferences, if the cameras are on and people aren't paying attention, they're sending out some pretty clear signals as to what's going on. And then also, the more you see someone and the better you see them, then the more expressions, these micro expressions, the movements and things that you can see, the more you decide if you're going to like that person. And if you're going to interact with that person, trust that person. It's very, very, very important. So it's hard to dispute that the physical proximity that we get by being with someone just can't be beat when you get right down to it. It really can't. So keep an eye out for that and expect to go back to the office at least part-time, unless you're one of those lucky people like the ones I just mentioned who can work from home and work from anywhere around the world, and the boss is happy as can be. So keep the boss happy. Maybe that's the rule here, right? And make sure you get my newsletter. All of this stuff is in the newsletter every week. CraigPeterson.com/subscribe. And of course, you can also go online and read many of these newsletters as well. Thanks for joining us. Every once in a while, I like to go and kind of recap things, and one of the things that has been incredibly popular is my tips. They're in my newsletter every week. So we're going to review a few of those top tips right now. I love that intro music. Hopefully you do too. Well, I have been really diligent in my newsletters every week, and this is thanks to my wife. She's been kicking me in the pants for a while to do this, as well as you guys, because each and every one of us has questions about what we should do, how we should do them. I have questions. I go online, try and figure it out, right? We go and we look at Google, or maybe we DuckDuckGo. There's lots of ways to do it. Nowadays, maybe you're going to an AI of some sort over at Bing or maybe ChatGPT to try and get answers. Well, I have been putting together now for a few months a tip every week. And one week we talked about Patch Aware, which is a new service that we're going to be offering that goes through, okay, here's what you need to patch, when you need to patch it, how you can patch it, right? I mean, what you need to patch based on some machine learning, AI, and people skills, looking at all of the patches, which ones you need to mess with. I have the top antivirus and anti-malware solutions for total PC protection. We're going to talk about that next. A step-by-step guide to clearing your browser history and wiping away your online footprint. Ransomware, the shocking truth about cyber criminals holding your data hostage. Protect your data like a pro. The 32110 backup method, how to Fort Knox your files on Windows, a step-by-step guide. So those are some examples of some that were in my newsletter. And if you don't get the newsletter, make sure you take a couple of minutes here. That's all it'll take, and sign up for it. Because this is the free newsletter. You don't have to pay a dime. There's no big obligation. What I'm trying to do is get the information out there, get it to you, get it to your friends, let you share it with people. And once you've got all that information, you are going to be ever so much safer. Let me tell you, I'm absolutely convinced of that. And we keep hearing that from people. So that's a very good thing. And what I've been doing is putting these tips that I write, I put them all together from scratch, putting them up on my website at craigpeterson.com. So you can go there, you can get some of this information pretty easily now, and I do put it into my newsletter as well. So let's start with the first one that was in the recent newsletter, and this is the top antivirus and anti-malware solutions for your PCs. You know, the internet is a very scary place. It has some serious problems. Microsoft has been trying to deal with them for a very long time. And, I'm a little opinionated here. And frankly, Microsoft has never been a particularly good computer programming company. And the worst part about Microsoft is how they started. And they started with a hack. It was based on MS-DOS, which of course Bill Gates bought from another company and sold to IBM, and that became PC-DOS. And they grew from there, right? They wanted a windowing interface. You might have noticed that Windows kind of follows the lead from Apple again and again and again. But they followed that lead, and they put together their little Windows and Windows for Work groups. You might remember Windows 3.11 was kind of a big one for quite a while. And Windows 3.11 gave you that little point and click interface, but it was still really DOS. It booted DOS and then put the little window interface on top of it. And because it was so poorly written, and because the machines at the time were so slow, they ended up having applications that went around the operating system entirely and depended on that. So because Microsoft did not do what they should have done, what Apple had done, they gave people that were writing software, they gave people who were writing software the opportunity to write things in a very inefficient, or maybe more efficient, ineffective, less secure. There's a lot of ways to describe it, So that's how Microsoft came about. And I worked on Windows for quite a while. One of the projects I was on for a year or so was when Microsoft decided they needed to completely rewrite everything because it was such a mess. And that was Windows NT, the NT 1.0 days. And of course, that went along, and Dave Cutler, the design, there's all kinds of history there we could talk about. But they came out with something that was better. But they still had so many programs that they had to run that were doing some bad things that, my gosh, it just propagated all kinds of bad programming. Anyways, going into a lot of detail here. Some people are going to like it, but hopefully you appreciate the background, right? That's why you listen. Now, nowadays, Windows has been really the subject of a lot of attacks, of viruses, malware, of all kinds of things, and has pulled up its socks. One of the best tools you can use for antivirus and anti-malware is free in the Windows world. And it's called Windows Defender. Now, it's had its problems, and it has its pros as well, free being one of them. But I've seen some really great statistics, and I talk about this in my article on my website here. But Windows Defender really is an excellent choice for protecting your computer. If you're a home user, if you don't have a lot of things that you're worried about, it can really do a great job in protecting you. And I've seen some of the numbers, the statistics that have been put out, where they've analyzed some of the major software on the market that's designed, or supposed to anyways, help protect you from the bad guys. And that includes things like the Norton antivirus, right? McAfee, the whole Symantec thing. And when you look at the final numbers, Windows Defender that comes free with Windows, you got to make sure it's turned on, is something that is as effective, or even in some cases more effective than all of those that I mentioned to you. So let's go through a few that I like. For my clients, I use some Cisco anti-malware. It's absolutely phenomenal, but it costs real money. And if you're not a client of mine, you are going to have a hard time getting it, because you buy these things in license packs. And some of these license packs for some of the software can be 1,000 licenses. So it gets really, really expensive for the little guy. So let's go through the things that aren't expensive. We mentioned free already. It comes with Windows. Next up, Bitdefender. They've got some excellent protection against malware, viruses, and other cyber threats. It's very simple. It has a firewall. Now, you might say, Craig, wait a minute, Windows, doesn't it have a firewall? Yes, it does. And the Windows firewall's biggest problem is that it has pretty much everything turned on and open. If you have a service running on your Windows computer, whether you know it or not, maybe a file sharing service or maybe a website, that service is open directly to the internet. And it's not really smart about what it's doing. It's a very basic firewall. It doesn't open up all of the packets and try and reassemble them and figure out what's going on, okay? So Bitdefender has a lot of great tools: anti-phishing protection, webcam protection, and as I mentioned, the firewall all built in. I like it. That's the number one thing I would get if you want to pay for something that gives you a little more of an edge. Number two is Malwarebytes. Now, Malwarebytes is primarily a scanner that looks for malicious software, including some rogue security software, adware, spyware, all of which is annoying and can be used to trick you into doing something that you really shouldn't do, like, click on a link that might be bad. Cisco AMP for endpoints is very good, but that costs a few bucks. Cisco Umbrella, excellent software. But here's the trick with Cisco Umbrella. It has a free version. Check it out online. Cisco Umbrella can be purchased for free or for low cost for family by going to opendns.com. opendns.com. Check it out. All right, make sure you get my newsletter every week, including all of these tips. gregpeterson.com/subscribe. There's a couple more I want to get to right now before we disappear for a break, but I mentioned Umbrella, I mentioned Cisco AMP for Endpoint, Malwarebytes, Bitdefender. WebRoot antivirus is one that a lot of people I know like. This is kind of a cloud-centric antivirus, anti-malware. It has phishing protection, firewall, ransomware protection, and WebRoot has 3 consumer versions as well. They've got the basic antivirus package and Security Plus. F-Secure can help as well, and GData antivirus. But I think now you know. You can get some of the best protection available for free on your Windows computer by just turning on the Defender. Windows Defender. We're going through some of my tips from recent newsletters and helping you understand a little bit more about your computers and security. Up next, clearing your browser history. We talked about the top antivirus. You can find that article on my website at gregpeterson.com and anti-malware solutions for total PC protection here, really understanding what you need to do. Let's move on to the next topic here that was in, again, a recent newsletter, and this is more specifically about online privacy. It's probably the number one question I get, which is how can I be safe online? How can I gain a little bit of privacy? And there's a few ways you can do that. I've had a couple articles, and we've talked before about using a privacy-focused search engine, right? Which means not Google. There are some out there that you can use, and I've recommended them before. But one of the things you can do is clear your browser history in order to wipe away your online footprint. There are some tools you can use, and I've thought about this for a long time. What can I release? What should I release? And, part of the problem really is that it can be complicated, and I haven't figured out a way to make it really uncomplicated yet. I guess once I do, you'll be the first to know. But there are some settings that you can do and you can take. And again, you'll find them on my website. But you need to clear your browser's footprint. Here's the reasons I give, the top 5 for doing this. Number 1 is privacy. Clearing your browser history, your cache, and your cookies can help to protect your online and protect your privacy because it removes traces of your browsing activity and personal information. There are ways for websites to save information on your computer using these cookies and other methods. So by doing this, you can really help to prevent unauthorized access to some of that data and guard against tracking and profiling. Now, profiling is a new technique that's being used, and it's being used because people don't want cookies. So it tries to build a profile of you and uses that to sell your information to people out there that want to get their hands on it. So profiling is something you want to avoid. The next reason you want to clear your browser's history is security, because there are things like session hijacking that are being used more and more nowadays. Now, session hijacking is, let's say you've logged into your bank's computer via your web browser, and your bank has set up a session cookie. They do this all of the time. There's nothing nefarious about it. They need a cookie to know who you are as you go through their website. Well, sometimes there's some bugs in the software of the bank or the site that you're at, and that cookie is used for your session tracking, or in some cases, in fact most of them where there's session hijacking, there's private information that is encoded in the URL. So if you look at your URL at the top of the page, you'll see it isn't just, mybank.com. It's mybank.com / and this big long hexadecimal looking number. That number is generically known as a UUID, universally unique ID. And that can be used for your session. Well, a bad guy could potentially use that information, and they have, in order to take over your session with the bank or someone else. So removing these temporary files can really help with these session hijacking. It can help with what are called cross-site scripting attacks. These are pretty common out there too. You don't want those. So removing these temporary files as cached data can really help up a lot. It frees up storage space on your computer, but when you actually look at the size of some of these files that are stored, it's hardly worth mentioning. You're going to be removing temporary files that can slow down your browser, cause other issues, and it'll help you prevent unauthorized access. So let's get into exactly how you do this. You'll find it again on my website, craigpeterson.com. Just search for clearing browser history or browser history on my site. So here's what you can do, and I've got some pretty explicit instructions in that page. But in most browsers, you can go into your history tab and click on the clear history or delete history option. It's important to do this. I would advise you do all of these things more or less weekly. If you're using a browser that provides a lot more security than the basics, and that includes one of the browsers from Mozilla that will clear everything every time you exit the browser. Turn that on too, okay? Clearing your cache again removes those temporary files. Deleting cookies are a good idea. Now remember, if you delete your cookies, your browser is, when it goes back to a website that you've been to before, no one's going to remember that you were there. So it's not going to be able to, dump you right back into the session you were in. So that's the downside of deleting all these older cookies. Also, many people are using their browsers to store their passwords. That's something else I really want to discourage, because those passwords that are stored there in the browser are potentially pretty problematic. Because again, if that browser's hacked, if your computer's hacked, the passwords could be accessible to the bad guys. So your bank password that you've stored, you said, yeah, remember that for me. That password is now available on your computer to bad guys that can gain access to it. Now, a lot of us use browser extensions. I certainly do. I have 1Password, for instance, for keeping all of my passwords and keeping that information straight. And 1Password has an extension that I have in my browser so it can do an autofill for me, okay? It's pretty darn good. So to disable them, you can go to the extension section of the browser, toggle off all of the extensions you are not actively using. I typically have them disabled. If I need one, I turn it on. That's the safest way to do it. And then the other thing you should consider is the private browsing mode. Many people do use it just generally, and you'll find it in pretty much every browser. Sometimes it's called private browsing, sometimes it's called incognito mode, but what's happening at that point is it's not using your cookies. It's not storing cookies. It's not storing your browsing history. It's not creating those temporary files that last long term. So again, using private browsing mode really will help to minimize your browser footprint, something you should do. Now, third-party cookies have been a problem for a long time, but most browsers nowadays allow you to turn off what are called cross-site cookies. Maybe I should do a webinar on this and walk you guys through it. Let me know. Just email me, me@craigpeterson.com. Let me know if you think it's a good idea. If enough people ask, I'll go ahead and put one together, a free little webinar for everybody. But there are a lot of potential problems with these cookies, cross-site cookies, the session hijacking, tracking, profile building, privacy violations. And I've got step-by-step instructions in the article for Chrome, Firefox, Safari, and Microsoft Edge. All right, visit me online. Make sure you sign up for my newsletter. Get all of this stuff for free right there. craigpeterson.com/subscribe. We're still covering have you had your data stolen, where it was stolen. I'm going to tell you right now a website that you can go to find out if your personal information has been stolen, and it'll even monitor it for you for free. There's a guy by the name of Troy Hunt. He's down in Australia, and he started a website some years back, and the name's an interesting one. This has to do initially with gamers, online gamers, and then hackers kind of took it over, and it's the concept of being owned. You know, I own your computer now because I have complete control of it, and then that owned term kind of changed into pwned, which is, you know, I stole it from you, basically. It's now mine. I don't care if it's in your house and you're paying the electric bill. It's mining Bitcoin for me, right? And so he put together a website called haveibeenpwned.com. Now, it's not P-O-W-N-E-D. It's P-W-N-E-D. Let's see. Have I been P-O-W-N-E-D? What happens if I go to the wrong URL? Okay, good. It sent you the right one. So it's haveibeenpwned.com. Go there. If you haven't been there, you have to go there, because he has a service that's another part of this whole concept here with having multiple firewalls. It's kind of like a submarine. If one part of the submarine gets damaged, water comes in, you've got hatches in between these other sections, and they are not going to get breached, right? You just want the water in one area of a ship or a submarine, or the same thing with a firewall. So he has done some amazing yeoman's work. He wasn't paid for any of this for the longest time. Now he has a subscription service, and it's being used by 1Password, which is my favorite password manager by far. Nobody else even comes close. It's also being used by the browser guys like Google and others. So it's to be trusted. I've never met Troy Hunt myself. I've read a lot of stuff that he's written, and I've seen him speak and things. But this is the website. So it's Havei-been, B-E-E-N, pwned, P-W-N-E-D.com, or you can spell it P-O-W-N-E-D if you'd like. Go there, and you will see there on his homepage a box that you can punch in your email or your phone number. Now, it says international format. So let me make sure you understand what that is. International format, if you're entering a U.S. number, you would say +1 and then the phone number. Okay, our country code is 1 because, you know, we're the greatest, right? Well, we were first, the whole phone system, in setting up all of the standards. So we are 1. So you need to say +1, your area code, and then your phone number, whatever it might be. and then he will go ahead and look it up in his massive database. So what they've been doing is they being Troy, has been working with companies who had data stolen. And because data had been stolen, and these companies wanted to actually kind of be good about it, right? They went ahead and told Tony, here's all of the people's information that was stolen. Here's what was stolen, because you need to know that. Now, I got to tell you, most businesses, if they are hacked, have no clue what was stolen or what the bad guys did. And usually, by the way, the bad guys are living inside your network for a very, very long time. So he has that, but he also has information that has come from the dark web. And this is one case where I think the government getting involved has been a good thing. The federal government, as they find information about stolen accounts and things online, they've been sending some of that off to Troy. So I think that's fantastic. All here, all trustworthy. So if you put in your phone number here, or if you put in your email address or your password, and we'll talk about that in a second, don't worry about it. You're not giving it to the bad guys. And if you look up in what's called the URL bar, up on the top, near the top of your browser, where it has the address of the site that you're on, you'll see a little lock sign, and it says the connection is secure. If you click on it, you can look at the certificate, and you can see, okay, the certificate is from Cloudflare. They are a company that protects websites. So probably pretty darn legitimate. So I just put in one of my email addresses. This is a throwaway address I've been using for 20, 30 years. And it says, oh no, pwned. All right, so it's telling me that this email address that I've been using for almost 30 years, and it's my own private domain, actually, not almost 30 years, for 30 years, actually 31 now, has been stolen in a data breach. So it's telling me here that it's been pwned in 8 data breaches and found in 1 paste. And let's explain what those are. So the breaches are when bad guys have stolen data. It's been unintentionally exposed to the public. It's been stolen because a bad guy got onto the network, etc., etc., okay? It's very, very good. And I notice now that Troy Hunt here on haveibeenpwned.com has a link now to 1Password Password Manager, which, as I said, is the only one I use. And now it looks like Troy is recommending it. Hopefully he makes a couple of bucks off of that, because, man, has he been doing yeoman's work. So it's showing me Adobe. So 153 million Adobe accounts were breached, with each containing an internal ID, username, email, encrypted password, password hint in plain text, and more. And it says the password cryptology was poorly done. In other words, it was crap. B2B USA business, 105 million individuals in that breach. BitTorrent, January 2016, was hacked. BitTorrent is a protocol that I use for downloading copies of large files, particularly Unix executables, ISO images and things, and share them with people. Clear Voice surveys. This was in April 2021, and they had a publicly facing database backup that was taken and redistributed on a popular hacking forum. Isn't that something? 15 million unique email addresses, 17 million rows of data, included names, physical and IP addresses, sex, dates of birth, plain text passwords. Oh my gosh. Data enrichment exposure. This was in October 2019. 1.2 billion records. Dropbox, mid-2012. And in August 2016, they had stolen in 2012. Looks like email addresses and passwords. Verifications.io, February 2019. Right. This just goes on and on. Zynga. So let me see, that verifications was 763 million unique email addresses, dates of birth, employers, sex, geographic locations, job titles, names, phone numbers, physical addresses, and Zynga. So what I've been seeing, and by the way, in the paste, this is the underground revolution.eu paste. is what it was called, and it had 34,000 emails in it. So what does all of this mean? Well, all of this means that I am going to see email that's very convincing. I'm already seeing it. I'm seeing emails, these spam phishing emails, that are actually spear phishing in my email boxes that have in them my address, my name, sometimes my phone number, and they're trying to convince me of something, right? It's like, okay, your account has been compromised. That's just such a common thing for them to say, because it has been. Here's, we need you to do an update. It's your account associated with, and then they give the physical street address or the P.O. box, whatever it might be, so they can steal your information. So that is haveibeenpwned.com. Check it out. Make sure you get my newsletter. It's free. The information's free. craigpeterson.com/subscribe. And we're going to get into 2FA right now. We're going to talk about authenticators right now. Two-factor, multi-factor. What is this? You're hearing it all of the time. Some of us are being required to use it for our businesses, and you're going to see it more and more for good reason. So probably the first industries to really start using the authenticator idea was banking. That's probably number one. And it was to help secure online banking, financial transactions, and then in more recent years, we've seen other industries jumping in, including healthcare, government, technology companies like mine, all using them. Well, why do we use authenticators? You might have seen them. Some of them are these little key fobs, right, that have a 6-digit number that keeps rotating. Some of them are apps. That's what I tend to use on our phones. The list goes on of some of the things that they can do, should do, etc. But the reason you want to use an authenticator like that is because the most secure way of handling your authentication is something you know along with something you have. So the something you know would be your username or your email address and your password, right? That's something you know. But we now know that the bad guys know our usernames and passwords, right? Well, and that's part of the reason I keep saying use a different username or email address, and definitely use a different password for every website out there, right? Without a single exception. You have to do that. And the reason you have to do that is because they've got your current password. They've got your current email address. So what happens with an authenticator is, okay, you know your username and your password. The bad guy knows your username and password. But with an authenticator, they have to have that 6-digit code that changes every 30 seconds. They don't have it, right? At least you hope they don't have it. And they don't have it because if you're using an authenticator, like one of those little key fobs, or you're using an application on your phone, some of these applications are free, such as Google Authenticator. And Google Authenticator is a great little authenticator. Google Authenticator works on all kinds of websites right now. Google, of course, uses it. Dropbox, Facebook, Microsoft, most banks, they all use it. So it's free. Why aren't you using it? So what you have to do is you download it onto your smart device. It can be Android, it can be iPhone, and you download Google Authenticator absolutely free. And then what you do is you go to a website that supports Google Authenticator or compatible, right? There's lots of compatible password managers, such as 1Password, which is the one I recommend, and many others that I won't mention because I don't recommend them, okay? But they're all compatible with Google Authenticator. So you go to the website. Usually you'll go into your account settings. And in your account settings where you would change your password, you set up, it's usually called 2FA, for two-factor authentication. What's the first factor? Your username and password. What's your second factor? It is the authenticator. So you set up the authenticator. It might show you a QR code that you scan with your phone. Very easy to do. I also, if you're using 1Password on your laptop or desktop computer, it shows that that website will show you that QR code, and 1Password will automatically find it on the page and set you all up. It is so easy to do nowadays. So you now have in your Google Authenticator or 1Password, you now have an account for that specific website, no matter what it is, the bank, Microsoft, Google, whatever. Okay. And so now, next time you want to go log in, what's it going to do? Well, by the way, it's before you even get to the point of logging in again. Once you set it up, it's going to say, okay, so tell me what the current 6-digit code is, just to make sure everything worked right. If you don't give it the right 6-digit code, then, well, that failed, and you have to try it again, right? Try to set it up again. It's not going to penalize you because you didn't have the right code, all right? You don't lose access to your account. So there's not a lot to worry about here. So next time you go to log in, you are going to be able to pull up Google Authenticator and log in to that account. Now, Google Authenticator, as long as your phone's getting backed up, you're not going to lose those authentications. But there's another trick I want you guys to be aware of. And that is when you set up an authenticator, it will often give you the option of having a bunch of codes, one-time use codes generated. So it'll generate 8 or a dozen, maybe more, of these one-time codes. And the idea behind this is keep those codes, don't lose those codes. And if for some reason you lose your authenticator, the phone gets destroyed, your backup didn't work, you can still log in by using one of those one-time passwords. Now, there's a big difference between using an authenticator application that has that 6-digit code that keeps rotating every 30 seconds with a new code. Big difference between that and getting a text message. Text messages can be and are intercepted. And at the very beginning, I was talking about what? I was talking about getting a text message saying, your account has been breached. We need to confirm that this is you so that we can clean up the mess. And please respond with the 6-digit code that we send you. And then the bad guy goes and logs into Microsoft, Google, Dropbox, Box, Facebook, your bank, whatever it is. And what is that company going to do? It's going to send you a 6-digit code because now you're safe, right? And so that 6-digit code comes to your phone. And remember, you just got this other text message that said, we're trying to verify you. You need to send us this code to make sure it's you. And so people now send that 6-digit code off, and the bad guys now have your one-time password, your two-factor authentication, that 6-digit number that was texted to you, right? So be very, very careful. It could be done with something like Google Authenticator or 1Password too. They could say, "Oh, we need to know your 6-digit code." But it's a little more obvious that they're trying to get your two-factor 6-digit code from you when it's an authenticator app versus it's just a text message. Then the other thing that's happened before with the text message thing is, a couple of different things. One, and this is very, very targeted, right? They got to be coming after you. They know you own a business that has a lot of cash in a bank account that they can steal, or very frequently you've got a lot of Bitcoin or some other cryptocurrency that they want to get their hands on. So what they'll do is they will either transfer your phone number to their phone, or they will try and clone your SIM. And they do that by calling up your cell phone carrier and pretending they are you. So I want to ask you a question. I want you to think about this seriously. How much information about you is up on the internet? What do you post on Facebook? What do you post on LinkedIn, Instagram, whatever it is you use online? Can the bad guys go there and figure out enough about you to fool the phone company into transferring your phone number to them? Man, this happens. I know this one guy had a lot of, it was actually Bitcoin, cryptocurrency, and he noticed that his phone just hadn't getting his normal volume of messages or phone calls. So he started looking into it, and that's exactly what had happened to him. So call your phone carrier right now and say, hey, Verizon, T-Mobile, Sprint, whoever it is you're using, I want to make sure we set up a password so that only I can call and make changes to my account. That makes sense to you? Makes a lot of sense to me. So do that as soon as the show is over, okay? Because I got some more information for you here. So that's one of the things they do, and they cannot do that. It doesn't matter. It's still my phone number all day long. You're not going to have my unique 6-digit number that changes every 30 seconds. That little key is not going to be in your hands. Now, you should do this, and I have myself done this, on every website that supports it. I did it with my buddy, and it was really kind of fun with him going through because he had a lot of resistance to doing it. And this is even after he had 2 paychecks stolen by the bad guys because of how he did things, right? With his passwords and his accounts and everything else, right? Sometimes. But anyways, it's not that hard to do. Now, my business, as you probably know by now, is cybersecurity. It's been my focus in the online world really since I got hacked on the internet back in 91, I guess it was, 92. Back then, it wasn't terribly malicious. It was called the Morris worm. And it really hurt my business there for a few days while I tried to figure out what was going on. But I've been doing this for over 30 years, and I have a free newsletter, absolutely free. It is not chock full of advertisements. It's chock full of great information, including my weekly featured tip. And it's something that you should get and you should have. But because my business is cybersecurity, I don't just use 2-factor authentication. I use multi-factor authentication. So for things that we log in at, when we have customer information, it's a username, it's a password, and with us, it's also the 1Password token, kind of like what we've just been talking about here, with using a Google Authenticator compatible device. But I also require biometrics. So it also has to do with face scan in order for us to get at any of our customers' information. So read this article if you didn't get it. If you're not on my list yet, just email me at craigpeterson.com. Let me know what you want. Be glad to send it off, or Mary will send it. Take care. craigpeterson.com online.